All right, welcome back to the Old Soldiers channel. So as I'd said in my last video, I'm going to start on a bit of an exploration of the Old Testament Christian and the Tanakh and Jewish scriptures, looking at what man is, what we are, and trying to understand masculinity and right masculinity from an ancient perspective. Now, as many of you know, Jordan Peterson had done a series known as his biblical series some years ago. Got a lot of traction going through and examining as stories which revealed truths about human nature, about psychology and the human need. Uh, Basically, he looked through Genesis and examined a number of characters, and we're going to do a fair bit of overlap with that. I hope to continue on past that point. But it's going to be a bit of a different approach. You see, Jordan Peterson is a clinical psychologist, and his approach was to look at it from a largely materialistic perspective as a textbook of a kind on what we are and what we need, what we are made of, I suppose, on a psychological level. And one of the things that he points out when he goes through looking at that is that the depth of these words seem to be utterly mystifying to him because he has a single paragraph on Cain, and every time he reads it, he sees more revealed about the nature of humanity and the nature of desire, the nature of sin, the nature of righteousness, although we might not use those terms to describe it. And I think that's a very true observation that we need to understand at the outset, that it's easy to simply read through these texts and say, yep, 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 got it, this is what happened, carry on. But there's a lot more going on here. You see, these words are given to give us a deep understanding about what we ought to be and what we are and what we should be doing about that. Now, Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are really kind of the foundational texts, which they kind of give us our start state and understanding the condition in which we currently find ourselves. I would argue that I'm no clinical psychologist. I was a soldier for quite a lot of years and a senior officer towards the end of that. And I have a different way of looking at things, obviously. The way that I would see these particular portions of Scripture are kind of what we would call in the armed forces situation friendly, maybe even situation enemy. They give us kind of the context in which we're operating. You see, whenever we would look at an operation, the first thing you do is you essentially evaluate your situation. You don't start with your execution and the what to do. You start by understanding the circumstances that you are in, all of the resources that are available to you. When you go through your situation, I mean, you're going to talk about terrain, you're going to talk about the limitations on movement. You're going to talk about weather. You're going to talk about all of your own forces, your allies, your higher and lower forces, that their capabilities, their limitations, their morale, and all of that stuff, so that you have a good concept of what you have to work with here before you start going about the execution. Of course, the enemy situation is just as vital, but it's essential to have both. Because if you know your enemy, you understand his situation, but you don't understand your own situation, your plan is going to be based on an assumption of what you could do to the enemy without any real understanding of whether or not you can even do that, right? It's something that Sun Tzu had famously said that, and I'm going to paraphrase terribly here, but if you know your enemy, that you can essentially win half the time. And if you know yourself and your enemy, you can't lose. It doesn't necessarily mean you win. It just means you can't lose because you won't engage an enemy that you can't fight. and you'll create the circumstances where you can fight that enemy. And that ultimately is what we're going to set about to do here as we look at Genesis 1, 2, and 3 and have a quick glance at the nature of what we are according to Scripture. And I think you'll find it's quite revolutionary. Revolutionary, I should say, to our understanding in modernity. It gives a very different picture than what you will normally think of. And it is ultimately what in the internet terms would be a red pill. And I'll go into that in a second because I think it's a really valuable image and one that we'll explore a little bit. And why not? Because the new Matrix movie, however terrible it might be, is about to come out, and it'll do us some good to think about what the image of that is in the Matrix. So, to get started here, the circumstances that are presented to us in the book of Genesis about the creation of mankind, it sets a pretty clear set of parameters upon our place in the hierarchy of creation, right? Now, just before we go anywhere else, let's just take a pause and consider what is presented to us in the creation story. Now, you can sit there and we can get into a wonderful debate about the literalness of Genesis 1, and I'm not here to do that today. What I want you to understand is that what is being presented to you is a statement of our place in the world. And that statement of the place in the world is that God existed before anything existed, and that he had always existed. And, of course, the presentation of God in Genesis 1 is both singular and plural, and you have God talking to himself. Of course, the Jewish scholars would say, obviously, when he talks about we, he's talking to the angels, but it's only because the idea of Trinitarian God is quite offensive to that understanding. But the Trinity's there from the beginning. You find him in Genesis 1. He's floating about in eternity, and essentially he decides that he wants to create. And it's not that he needs to create, he wants to create, as it is an expression of his nature to be creative and to generate new things. And he is a relational God. From eternity, he was a three-part God. And so he desires more relationship, and he creates a life in the world. And it's not just life, it's the whole world. It's his tapestry, the universe. And he spends 6 days creating. And on the sixth day, when he creates all of the animal life that walks upon the land, he also creates a man made in his own image. And it says male and female he created them. And that it was his design from the beginning that man would essentially lord over creation, that he was appointed as the governor or the landlord, in a sense, of God's created world known as Earth and all of the life that was within it. So that tells us some pretty fundamental things, right? We actually, again, to go back to military orders, we first look at what our operational authorities are, as in who are we responsible to and who is responsible to us. And, there's all these terms that we use like operational command, operational control, tactical command, tactical control, and we designate our relationship with other friendly units in those contexts. We might be under operational command of a particular headquarters or organizational unit, and that tells us that although we've been given a freedom to act, it's only within the parameters of the mission that is assigned to us by the person or the organization that we are in operational command to. And then we might have those who are under us that we are then responsible for taking those orders and then extending them down and directing those under our command or control within the parameters that we are given. But it's fairly strict. You have freedom within command to exercise things in line with that command, right? And that's very much the nature of the relationship which we are seeing here presented to us in Genesis 1, that God created man, and man was essentially under God's command and control, that God had absolute authority over man. Man has no authority in himself, but he has been given authority over the world that is derived from God who created it and owned it. Make sense? And so then God gave man authority, and that authority is derived over the world. But that means, of course, that man's authority over the world is not autonomous. It has to be exercised within the parameters that are God's. So it is an authority to command the world according to what God has given authority for. And anything that moves outside of that is essentially, we'll call it unlawful command. So that's what takes place in the first of the chapters of Genesis. We also get the impression here that God created man in his own image, and that there's something unique about man, that we carry the image of God inside of us. And that's a whole different thing we could explore at terrible length, but I'm not going to today. What's important about that and relevant is that it says that God created man in his own image, male and female, he created them. And there's no distinction here between man and woman being created in the image of God, but both are. And what that tells us is that God's attributes are expressed both in masculinity and femininity, and that both are aspects of his nature within us, and that they have to be, of course, united to be a full expression of God's nature, or the image of his nature. So masculinity is not above femininity in the sense that it is more godly, but it is that aspect of God's image which is the aspect of rule. Woman is made as a helper, man is made to rule and to exercise authority, and woman is made to support him in that exercise of authority and to control the world. So that's essentially what we're getting in Genesis 1. Now, this kind of leads us to where we need to have a bit of a conversation about what the red pill actually is. See, what I've just expressed to you is fundamentally different, and it's necessary to understand it before we can even look at anything else. It's fundamentally different from what the world has told you that you are. The world has told you that you are a functionally independent force, that you are beholden to nobody, and that you exercise free will, and ultimately that the only repercussions that you can face for the exercise of your free will is the censure of the majority of other free will humans if they disagree with the way that you act. What I just described is a fundamentally different architecture of reality. That is utterly different from the materialistic worldview, and it's necessary to understand this because what you have been taught is, of course, it's a lie no matter what you believe. You don't even have to accept the Trinitarian Christian God to perceive that there is a fundamental flaw in materialism. You don't actually have free will to exercise according to your whim. You are absolutely constrained in so many ways, and you can decide that you want to act in a certain way because it makes sense to you, but that will not result in the outcomes that you want because you are ultimately under the rule of what is. You could plant rocks in the earth to grow rock trees and it won't happen because that doesn't work. You are subject to the laws of the universe that you exist in. So that is functionally true. And it's functionally true that you can't simply exercise whatever relationship that you want and expect the outcomes to just be good because you desire them to be good. If it is not a relationship that is set up according to what is profitable for man, then it's not going to work, right? It's just functionally not going to produce. So, I mean, for example, I mean, this is a big old horrible red pill for the world. And again, I will explain this in a second if you don't understand the jargon. But a man who marries a man has not, in fact, married a man. There's a number of problems with that, according to Genesis 1. The first problem is that we are made in the image of God, male and female, and that the design of God is that we be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, and that according to God's design, that requires us to be joined male and female. If you decide to put male and male together or female and female together, guess what happens? There are no children born of that union. Thus, it is not capable of fulfilling the purpose of the joining, which is to create new life. Now, you can say, well, that's not the purpose of joining, and I just want to be happy and enjoy the intimacy of relationship according to what I find pleasurable. And you're able, I suppose, to do that. But the fact is that that is not what God designed us for. And if you want to be an evolutionist, it's not what nature designed you for either, right? Because by any measure, whether it's religious or materialist, your biological function of sexuality is to create new life. And anything that doesn't do that is not actually fulfilling and satisfying the purpose of your sexual biological function. And what that means, you can say it's not going to have any psychological impact, but if it's what it is designed to do and you proceed to do it repeatedly without having that outcome, it is not actually going to have a positive effect for you. But even more, it is God's design for those masculine and feminine characters to be combined in one flesh, and that there's a unity of purpose and function between that bonded pair, and that all of his attributes are expressed in that. So they're supposed to be bound together in unity and common purpose, which is, again, not done when you bind masculine to masculine or feminine to feminine. So there's some flaws here, according to what Genesis 1 says. And to get into the matrix imagery here, so the red pill image, which is a very popular internet terminology, it basically refers to the scene in the Matrix movie, which if you're under 30, you probably haven't seen unless you went back and looked at it. And in the Matrix movie, you have this character, Neo, played by Keanu Reeves, and he is, a programmer that is kind of into conspiracy theories, and he's looking to see that something doesn't seem right in the world to him, and he starts pursuing it, and he comes upon a few of the other characters there that he follows, and he finds them being pursued by Agent Smith, and ultimately he comes into he supports them, helps them out, and he comes into a situation where you have the enlightened characters, and Morpheus, essentially, who is from the outside, inside the conspiracy, he sits down in the chair and he holds out his hand and he says, in this hand is the blue pill. If you take the blue pill, then you'll wake up tomorrow and you'll remember nothing and you'll carry on with your normal life. And everything will be good, just, living in America in the 90s. Glorious. And if you take the other pill, the red pill, you'll wake up and see what everything really is. And so, of course, Neo takes the red pill, and he wakes up inside of a pod, chained to a wall, where his body is being used as an electronic generator for robots that have overtaken humanity and destroyed all human life in the world, that is free, except for this one bastion, I think, called Zion. And the symbolism in these movies is deep and tremendous, although wrong. But it's striving towards rightness. And ultimately, he wakes up into this scorched world with no life on the surface, no plant life, no animal life, and he's given an opportunity to awaken to the reality that all of this daily life that he'd been living inside of the Matrix was just a dream. And he's plugged into a computer and he's playing a simulation. And by doing that, he's able to overcome the simulation and gain special powers and dodge bullets and basically become a superhero. He's figured out that it's all a trick. Yeah? So why am I saying all of that? Well, it's actually quite germane to the circumstance that is being presented to us here in Genesis. You see, you may be like Neo in the Matrix. You might be sitting there, you might think that the world is a certain way, that it is functioning according to, 90s America, materialism. There is no real consequence to anything. There is no higher meaning. There's no higher purpose. And life is functionally just kind of enjoy as much as you can, you know, try not to be kicked out of the game before you get to have some fun. And, that is a pretty miserable way to live. It's not a very functional way to live. You might consider the possibility that there's anything to question in the public paradigm to be an offense, that we shouldn't challenge anything, we should just follow the science, and our governments are basically looking out for our good, and so on and so forth. Now, typically, in the internet jargon, the red pill is used to describe waking up to the reality that we are being lied to, that things are not as they seem, that the materialist, rationalist worldview is actually destroying us, and that we need to wake up and realize that there is more to this world, that we are being deceived into becoming consumers for an elite, etc., etc. The problem with that is that you actually are kind of taking a sort of red pill when you do that. You're waking up to the reality that, yeah, this world is not as benign as you might have been led to believe, and just living and providing a consumer base to a hungry, soulless machine of capitalism is not actually that profitable for you or for your soul. And that's great. But like Neo, what you're actually doing in this context is you're waking up into a world where there isn't really any hope for anything. You might think that you get to be like Neo, and Neo got to be a hero and he got to have superpowers because he realized that the whole system was fake, and so he could just twist the system around himself, and he could then become this kung fu master dodging bullets guy. That's not really the truth, right? Because Neo actually just became a man. He became a man in a world that was just totally destroyed because the sky was scorched. They had destroyed the access to the sun. Now, here's some imagery for you. So that the robots which they had created, which were AI machines, autonomous, self-thinking robots that had rebelled against humanity, humankind, in the last-ditch effort to try and destroy these robots, they destroyed the sun. They didn't destroy the sun. They basically filled the atmosphere for millennia with so much garbage that the sunlight couldn't get through. Of course, scientifically, this is probably not a thing that you could do without greenhouse scorching the earth and killing everything, but that's really not here nor there. The point is, they were trying to kill the robots by removing their solar energy. I'm not sure what exactly prevented the robots from using fusion or fission, but whatever. The robots responded by, for some reason, using humans as batteries because they generate an electrical field. Well, I mean, the whole premise is really very silly from a scientific perspective, but that's not the point. The point is that Neo wasn't actually a superhero. He was just another dude in a doomed world that had no hope. And ultimately, that story ends with Neo kind of going off and defeating the corrupted program inside of the Matrix for the robots so they didn't have to start over. And then he dies in the process and, you know, wins clemency to the humans on the surface that are, or not on the surface because their city's deep underground, but you get the point, that are outside the Matrix so they don't kill them right away. And that's about it. Like, what does Neo actually accomplish? Nothing, really. Like, he becomes a human who dies, and he gives people the option now of being aware that they're in a simulation. So I guess their life can be like some sort of horrible physics, goofy video game now. And those who choose to live in the real world enter into a world with no sunshine, no plants, no animals, algae, vat, paste bars of nutrition, and basically mortality that they will get to enjoy miserably until such time as their time on Earth is done and they die. This is why the red pill, black pill conversation comes up. Because people say, well, there's waking up and then there's just being a doomer. You know, you didn't take the red pill, you took the black pill. You realize that you didn't look at the brokenness of the system and then get motivated to do something about it. You looked at the brokenness of the system and you gave yourself into despair. And that isn't the purpose of taking this red pill. It's supposed to be so that you become the hero, Neo, and you save the day. But you're not going to save the day. And this is what Genesis is actually going to tell us here. Because the first principle that we just got was that we are in a hierarchy under God. And God has placed everything on the earth under the hierarchy of Adam. We aren't Adam, by the way. Adam is Adam, and he is our great forefather. But what happens following this is that God gives man the responsibility to rule in the garden, and essentially he names all of the animals. He is given the authority over the animals to provide for them. He's not actually eating them at this point, at least as we understand it in the narrative. Everything is living in harmony and there is no death. And he's given a garden to tend to. Now, the garden isn't the whole world. The garden is just a place in the world for Adam so that he can essentially live in the presence of God in the sun and be a caretaker of what God has given to him. And then he's not happy. None of the animals are a fitting companion for him. So God takes the woman out of his side. Adam is formed from dust and turned into a man. And then God breathes life into him, which is a very important image I don't really have time to get into, but it is that there is physical life, but then there's spiritual life that is derived from God's own breath, which comes into him. He has a sort of an eternal sense of him, not in the sense of God's constant eternal existence, but that he now has become a being which is not merely physical, but will be whether or not he is physical. But nevertheless, he has no companion, so God takes the rib from his side, makes it into woman, and he says, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. You know, he's delighted. This is the natural companion for him. It is the perfect companion for him, and he for her. And this is what is supposed to be. And for this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. This is the way things were good. I'm even going to say this is the way they were supposed to be. It's the way that God created them, and they were good. But then Adam scorches the sky, and cuts off the sun to the earth. Because the woman is deceived by the serpent tells her that although God has prevented Adam and she from eating of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he's done so not according to his claim, because he had said if they eat of it on that day, they will surely die. But the serpent says, this is not true. You will not die, but on that day that you eat of it, you'll become like God, knowing good and evil. And the woman desires to be wise. She sees that it is good to eat, that it is good for food and to make one wise, and so she takes the fruit and she eats it. And her husband, she gives a piece of the fruit, and he, like her, eats the fruit rather than being obedient to the hierarchy that he was placed. He did something outside of his orders and actually which he was expressly forbidden to do, and he takes the knowledge of good and evil for himself. Now, of course, to Peterson, this is the awakening of the mind to consciousness and self-awareness and so on. But really, what this is, in the image that is being given to us, is that Adam and Eve were made in submission to the goodness of God. And they were not given the freedom to willfully do according to their own desire, lest they fall into error. But what they are doing here is they are choosing to take upon themselves the burden of deriving from themselves and not from God's holy and perfect eternal design what right and wrong are. You might say, well, that seems good, except it's like, if I can put it a different way, because we have a tendency, I think, because of this very event, to say, well, man should decide for himself what right and wrong are. These things are not absolute, they are subjective. Well, that's not obviously the case. It's like saying, okay, so here I am giving you the formula for gravity according to relativity. You say, no, I don't want that. I'm going to figure this out for myself. But I have no training in maths, no skill, no real experimental equipment, but I am going to derive for myself how gravity works. I don't care what you tell me the speed of light is with all of your equipment and testing. I'm going to tell you what the speed of light is. I will decide for myself, with my no equipment that could possibly measure this, what light is and what its speed is. And in the same sense, Adam and Eve have decided to cut themselves off from God's truth and to make up truth for themselves from within themselves. They've cut off the sun and chosen, and this is actually a really apt analogy, they've cut off the sun and they have chosen to let their own heat be the heat by which they live. And it's there, it's real. I mean, the heat of a human person is real. You do generate heat because you consume energy, and that energy burns in your digestion, and it pumps blood, and all of these processes that are going on at the cellular level are generating heat. But if you live in any environment where the sun goes out, and I spent some time up in the Arctic. I lived for 3 years in the Arctic and subarctic, bounced around in the Arctic Circle when I was working with the Canadian Rangers. When the sun goes down and it doesn't come back up, your heat is insufficient to keep you alive. You might be able, by skinning other animals and wearing their skin, to basically insulate yourself sufficiently with animal skins in that environment, such that when you eat their flesh, you will produce enough heat to live. Sure. But you cut the sun off completely, and you go to 0 Kelvin, like, you're not going to live at 300 whatever it is, 340 something, I think, below centigrade. Yeah, you're not going to live in that. It doesn't matter what you do. And that's essentially what Adam and Eve are doing. They're choosing on their own weakness and inability to decide right and wrong, and they have cut themselves off from God as the source of that truth. The reason that I brought up all of that stuff about the red pill is that is the red pill that Bible is trying to give you at the very beginning, is that whatever you think about the nature of you and this world, the truth is that if you wake up, you will see that you are cut off from the sun. You are cut off from the source of life and truth. And this happens because your forefathers, like Neo's in the story, chose to burn the sky. And they cut it off. And now, having been given dominion over this earth, they no longer have they left, what am I trying to say? The earth itself is under their authority. They had authority to do that for the earth. Just like the reality of the world. Like, you can say it's unfair, you can say what you want, but the fact is that if our fathers and grandfathers had decided to launch nuclear missiles at one another between America and Russia, it wouldn't matter what we had chosen. This world would be a hellscape of nuclear waste and winter. Well, I don't know about the nuclear winter thing. Some say yes, some say no. It's not the point. Like, life would be fundamentally devastated across most of the globe if anything survived, right? And it wouldn't matter whether or not you thought that was fair. That is what you had inherited from them. Just as there's no cod around Newfoundland because fathers and grandfathers of my generation overfished it till it was gone. And it may not have been the individuals in their fishing boats. I mean, they might say it was the commercial fishing industry, and that's fine. But that still happened, and we live with the consequences. That is the red pill. The red pill is that the reality of your world is that you don't have the power to just fix it. It's fundamentally broken. A lot of lessons here in Genesis. Death is not natural. It's not what is supposed to be. And we feel that. We recognize that. It resonates strongly within us that death is not natural. That's where our cult of security that is presently ruling our minds and our policies as nations in the West is destroying us, actually. It's a misguided recognition that death is evil and death is the enemy. And we don't want it for ourselves. We're generally quite content to give it to others if that provides our life with longer extension. But we see that in Genesis, but we also see that there's no escaping it. And that is because of Genesis. Because in cutting ourselves off from the source of life, we no longer have the sufficiency of life within us to stand against the entropy of this universe as it has been removed from God's preservation to that extent. And so that is the curse that God has cut mankind off from spiritual life. He's denied the ability to pierce the clouds and to draw upon the sunlight. And ultimately he will perish. There's nothing that can stop him from perishing because of that divorce between God and man, between perfect and imperfect. And as a result, although we want to do good things, we functionally cannot do good things. And that will come out over the course of the rest of the biblical history, because what it is actually trying to tell you, if you read all of the narrative of history given to us in biblical scripture, is that you can't do it, that nothing you do will ever be sufficient. No system of government, no effort of man to fix the brokenness of the world, nor even the brokenness in yourself. And even the best men will fall and they will sin, and they will grievously wound the people they care about. And such is the nature of our condition, because we have inherited that condition, whether we like it or not. Now, I'd mentioned the black pill concept earlier, that what you're not supposed to do with this is to be given into despair You're supposed to become like Neo, and you're supposed to choose to change the world. But the fact is, you can't any more than Neo could in the story, because you don't have the power to do that. And so, whether or not this is a black pill or a white pill that leads to light and truth actually has to do with how you receive it, because functionally, the truth that you need to recognize is the same in either case. It's what you do with that truth. And the fundamental first principle that we've got, our situation friendly, is situation friendly humanity neutralized, destroyed, needs to be brought to life. Everyone is in the infirmary. Our entire allied force is struck down with a wasting disease, and we don't even have any weapons. We can't fight the enemy of death. It's impossible for us to destroy death. We can maybe hit him with stones and sticks and with a concerted effort drive him back a pace or two. He's still going to come. He's still going to take everybody, but you might delay that for a decade or two if you're really rigorous in your feeble combat against him. But ultimately, you have no power to stop him. It's functionally impossible that you can win. That is the truth that Genesis is giving to us about our condition. And we can't fight the enemy of our own selfishness and win. None of our systems will ever work. None of our efforts will ever work to destroy that completely within ourselves. So the best we can do is to limit the damage that we do to ourselves and to others. And that's a pretty desperate situation that it's presenting to us. Because of you, cursed are you. You are cursed. All of your children will be cursed. Everything is cursed because you have done this thing and you've divorced creation from the God and the source of truth. So you can choose either to take the blue pill and deny that this is true, and you are still going to die. You're still going to face God ultimately. Or you can take the red pill and you can wake up, realize that you're in a pod in a scorched world, and the best hope that you have in this world is going to the city down in the dungeons where the robots are drilling on the walls and eventually going to come and kill everybody. You can do that. Or you can give yourself over to nihilism and hedonism because you've taken the red pill and you've taken that despair. Or you can take the other black pill, which is to destroy yourself because nothing matters, and give in to despair and suicide. I don't advocate either of those. They're terrible. Or you can let it drive you to the one thing that is offered, the rope down through the clouds. And that is Christ, that is sent into the world to make peace between God and man. And this God who is above the clouds that we have put in between us and God, that Adam put there, and that we have added to generation after generation, and we ourselves have contributed to. The blindness that we have, that as we reach up towards truth and goodness, we are prevented entirely from being able to reach past those clouds or gain any of the heat, warmth, and light to bring to life anything around us by the light of that perfect truth. Nothing we can do will ever, because of our smallness, allow us to reach past that. Nevertheless, the rope was let down. It is anchored to the earth. And we just need to go and to accept it instead of trying to build our silly towers that will never reach the clouds. Or build our our spaceships in a planet that has no energy with which to provide for the enemy, let alone ourselves. Instead, we need to take the offered rope. That's what it is. Not to hang ourselves, to hang on and be brought above the clouds. Not through our own power, but through our humbling of ourselves to the point where we're willing to acknowledge our powerlessness and accept the free offer. That's That's ultimately Genesis 1 to 3 in a nutshell. That you are broken. The world is broken. You can't fix it, but you can be fixed. And then you can be a force that is able to bring others to the place where they can be fixed. You can't fix them either. But if they see in you the transformation and new life, the hope that you now have, you can draw them to that same place, put their hand on that same rope, and they too can be brought up into the clouds and into the sunlight and receive life for the first time. That's the red pill. You can deny it. You can go back into your simulation, which is apparently late 90s America. Probably wasn't late 90s Bosnia. I'm not sure the robots wanted to simulate that. But, live your life purposely. Purposely, yes. Live your life without any great purpose, just trying to feed yourself day after day, enjoy the simple pleasures of your various entertainments and methods of making yourself drunk, whether it's drugs or alcohol, to numb the pain of daily life and wait to die. You can do that. Go take your blue pill. You don't have to subscribe to this channel and listen and seek after God. That's all good. You can take the red pill and give yourself over to despair and be black pilled if you want. That's on the table. If you really want death instead of life, or you can take the white pill. You can take Christ, the Christ pill. Grab the rope and let him lift you up. You just need to accept that you are unable to save yourself and go and seek him. Now that doesn't seem obvious, maybe. And how do I do that? Well, the answer is it's not as hard, it's not as complicated as you think, however hard that it really is. You just need to accept it. You need to be willing to humble yourself and ask for the help of a God that you may not even fully believe exists, but he nevertheless does. And I promise you that that's true. If you go and look for him, you will find him. He said that all who seek me with their whole heart will find me. And that is true. I can tell you it's true. I've seen it to be true in many lives. I've seen him to be powerful enough to give life and hope to even broken old soldiers like me, despite all of the wretched things that I've been subjected to and done myself. He nevertheless has given me hope, and he can give you hope as well, but you have to be willing to accept it and humble yourself to the point of reaching out to the rope so that you can be pulled up. That's the story. That's mental health for you. That if you want mental health, you need to accept this truth, and you need to accept that we are broken, but we can be fixed. And there is hope in this world, but the hope is not in this world. It is in that which is outside and above this world. We're all still going to die. Fact. We're all still going to be real and present and conscious after we die. You may not believe that, but if you examine your own real core soul beliefs, you'll recognize that you don't actually feel like you're going to cease to exist. I'm confident of that as well. You are the same person today that you were as a child, and you will continue to be the same person until the day that you die, and you will continue to be the same person after you die. And the question is, do you want to be brought into life, or do you want to live out in the despair of the daily drudgery and pointlessness of this life? Or do you want to throw yourself at the project of self-salvation, which ultimately you will not succeed at and will end in failure and despair? Or do you want to try and make life just that little bit better for everybody, but still also die? No, man, go ask God for help. He will help you. He will give you understanding. He will open your eyes. He will lift you up into the light, and you will have new life and hope. So I offer that to you, and I hope that if you have any questions or comments, that you will throw them below, and I will do my best to get back to everybody. And maybe we'll launch ahead into Kane soon. For those that are still with this conversation this far into it, I will tell you, the release schedule on videos, I will do my best. Understand, I do work full time as a pastor. I also have a family and 6 kids that I got to care for as well. And teaching 3 or 4 times a week, every week, puts a fair dent in my schedule as it is. So I am going to continue with this and keep pushing forward, but it will come as it comes. So yeah, if it has been an encouragement to you, let me know, and encourage me as well to keep at it. So, and if it hasn't, let me know so I'll know to shut it off. All right, guys, Godspeed, and I hope peace finds you.